Thank you everybody for coming. It's great to see so many familiar faces as well as so many new ones. So that's lovely to see. We are going to be joined today by Bethany, who's going to take us through our talk today. And we are going to be focusing on eyes on the prize. So she's going to explain all for us. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bethany. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you. All right, so our topic today is literacy for individuals with significant communication impairments who may be using AAC. And I'm going to begin today by, since it's about literacy, by starting with a story. So let me get started with that. Once upon a time, in a land, there was an SLP who lived in a land far, far away. She worked with children and adults who needed augmentative communication. No one expected the children to learn to read. They were too young. What about the adults? No one expected them to learn to read either. It seemed that everyone was too something to learn to read. Too disabled, too young, too old. The SLP did what she knew how to do. She focused on communication. After all, just like walking comes before running, everyone knew that communication came before literacy. So she worked on using AAC in real life with her clients. She spent hours programming vocabulary and teaching clients how to find the right words. She did this for many years. One day, she heard a fascinating idea that language and literacy are connected, and that everyone has the potential to learn to read and write. She looked back on her previous path with some sadness, but she decided to use this new knowledge to travel a new path. You might realize that that story is mine, and I can look back on that previous history with some level of regret, but I take some comfort in the words that are attributed to Maya Angelou, that I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. And I would encourage each of you to join me on this journey to do better when it comes to teaching literacy to individuals with significant communication impairments, and in particular, those who use AAC. So today we're going to begin by identifying a goal that we can share together. We're going to talk about starting earlier now, starting with the right practices, emergent literacy, when to progress, and conventional literacy. So I'll begin with a quote from Karen Erickson, 2019, that defines what literacy is. Literacy is the ability to read and write and use text and/or braille to communicate with the rest of the world. It's the ability to read and write and use text and/or braille to communicate with the rest of the world. Erickson, Copenhaver, Mem Fox are people whose names you'll hear throughout this presentation. And I encourage you, as you're looking into literacy yourself, to spend some time with resources that they've written. Now that we know what the goal is for literacy, let's think for a minute about some fallacies or some myths that we know about literacy. And one of them is that mastery of literacy can be achieved. The truth is that mastery of literacy is a myth. I am still learning how to spell words. I'm still learning how to shape sentences to say exactly what I want. And that's the truth for all of our clients as well. Mastery of literacy is an ongoing journey. Some clients are going to leap from mountaintop to mountaintop in literacy. It's going to seem like it just comes so naturally for them. Others, it's going to be a slow slog up the side of the mountain. They're going to have to stop for a while, take a breather. Maybe they'll start up again, maybe they won't. We don't know the answer to that. But we do know that any step towards progress in literacy is a benefit to these individuals. Students learn what they are taught. No student is too anything to make progress toward literacy. What Copenhaver and Erickson say is that we may not know how to teach all students with significant disabilities to read and write at a mastery level, but we do know that any efforts to assist all students in learning to read and write better have led to important outcomes that have contributed positively to the quality of their lives. We knew that no student is too anything to learn to read and write. The guy that you're seeing on the slide here is James. James said for the first time to his mother at age 16 that he loved her. James is learning to read and write. Will James become a master of literacy? Will he be able to read books on his own? I don't know. But what we do know is he won't make progress toward that if we don't teach him. For many individuals, we focus on functional communication, especially for those with complex communication needs. This is dangerous because it assumes three things. It presumes incompetence. It presumes that this individual will never get past this point. Second, it assumes that this is the priority for the person. How do we know that this person doesn't want to do more than read the sign on a bathroom? I knew a man named Melvin that at age 40 had never been taught how to read. He wanted to learn to read so that he could participate in social media and send texts. If we had only focused with him on functional reading, that's where he would have ended up, at reading signs and never being able to do these things that he really wanted to do. Finally, it does not help augmented and alternative communicators to have access to the skill that is most needed for their communication. And that is to take these incredible letters and do with them whatever they want. When we have access to these letters, we can say anything. We don't have to rely on somebody else programming into our device. We can accomplish whatever we want. And you can see that I'm emotional about this. And that's because if you think back to my journey, I think of the clients that I saw that I didn't provide them with this, and I wish that I had. Let's not ever do that again. So the idea is that we have people who have these access to these literacy skills, who, like Sarah, can be the person that they want to be, which is someone who is an author and an independent communicator and somebody who lives on her own and has the life that she wants to have. And this is the prize. But there's more to it than that. And we can sum it up in one word: joy. There is joy in sharing literacy with one another. Think about a little child when at the end of the day, you open up their book and it's this beautiful, relaxed time for some kids. It's that moment that they treasure all day. Or maybe it's the favorite book that you pull out and all of a sudden they're just giggling because they know what's coming on the next page. Many individuals who work with people with communication impairments or live in the homes with people with communication impairments are longing for this level of connection. And literacy can provide that. Learning to read, as Mem Fox says, is a joy, not a race. I want to show you a video that will share with you kind of the beginning of this journey of joy. I'm going to have to unshare my screen and share sound because I always forget to share the sound. So now you've participated with me in that, lucky you. So let me just start this video and you can see an example of a really early literacy and engagement that shows the joy.
Smith, his left eye swollen, and the cut above its
No,
right
there's no audio.
How much more bloody?
Not sure why there's no audio.
Vicious.
No. Okay, so what's happening in this video for anyone who's seen the movie Three Men and a Baby, and it really doesn't matter about the audio that much, but he's reading from a sports magazine. He's saying, and the guy was much more bloody, and look at this baby. Look at her looking between him and the magazine. And there's this connection there that is established between him and this child. There's also like the first parts of literacy, which is where this baby is realizing, oh, his attention is on that thing over there. That must be something that's important. So we're getting them into these really early engagements that are starting their literacy skills from a very young age. So let's talk about the importance of starting early or starting now. Many years ago, I thought that language was a precursor to literacy. We thought, okay, well, you have to have basic language before you can really start literacy skills. This is an old assumption, and it's based on the idea that literacy is, and language and literacy are learned in a sequential, predetermined way. And that's not the truth. The truth is that language and literacy develop concurrently because all of them are based on language. All forms of communication, whether it's speaking or listening, reading or writing, are all based on the core of language. And that being the case, that means that anything we do when it comes to language is building all of them at the same time, and they interrelate to one another. So when we're reading, we're learning words that then we might speak later, or we might write later, or we learn to, oh, that's what that means. So when Shona says something to me, I know what that means. All of them are based on language. So we know that language and literacy develop together. We also thought at one point that literacy was a school-based endeavor. This was something, okay, well, I'm going to wait until they get into school and then we'll start teaching them literacy. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I grew up with a mom who loved to read to me. When I was a tiny little girl, she was reading to me. So when I went into school, I had this love of books and I knew what to do with one. Literacy, we know now, actually begins at birth, if not before. We know that when we talk to children and they learn the intonational patterns of sentences, that helps them in their literacy. So these things start when children are very, very tiny, and it grows through the years. We know that strong foundations in book knowledge are really important. A child picks up a book and they start by chewing it. Well, that's fine. At least they have a book in their hand. And then they get the book and maybe they flip through the pages really fast. They're not really looking at anything, but they've learned how to flip pages. And then they come to a point where all of a sudden they're reading for knowledge. These are important steps for kids in learning. This is how I handle a book. It's held this way and not this way. Or I start at the front of the book instead of the back of the book. All of these things are learned as children are very young and into early school. Other areas of strong foundation include world experiences and knowledge. The more a child is out in the world and experiences the world, the more they can connect to text, the more they're exposed to language, which then they see in the text, and then they can use that and read themselves. All of these things work together. I think we can sum it up in looking at this image. It's the idea of a rope. And each one of the strands of that rope, when you tighten it, it tightens the whole thing. Language learning, literacy, cognition, experience, all of these things work together to lead an individual to greater skills in the area of literacy. So the importance here is that we start when they're very, very young. And if we haven't started, like the case was with Melvin, we start now. It's never too late. Let's see how far we can go. When we start, we want to start not only now or early, but we want to start with the right practices. And in order to do that, it's important that we understand the types of literacy in the world. And Copenhaver and Erickson and Copenhaver have defined these two types of literacy. One is emergent literacy and the other is conventional literacy. Emergent literacy is all the reading and writing behaviors and understandings that precede and develop into conventional reading and writing. So we're talking about book knowledge, and we're talking about the understanding of vocabulary and the idea that all the world knowledge that kids have. Those are the types of things that go into emergent literacy. Conventional literacy is reading and writing that follow the form, content, and the use of standard conventions. So we're talking about the skills that historically have been taught in school. A sentence starts with a capital letter, it ends with a period, you put space between the letters. Sentences tend to follow this pattern. Those types of things are what we're talking about when we are looking at conventional literacy, the sounds that the letters of the alphabet make and that sort of thing. Now, Copenhaver and Erickson have provided us with a really nice tool that helps us know how we can go about teaching literacy, or how we can go about knowing where that person's literacy skills are. So I'm just trying to close this. Okay. that we want to ask ourselves 4 questions. Question 1 is, does the student know most of the letters most of the time? This is really important because often we've said, well, they need to know all the letters. But what we know about the students that we work with are that often they're variable from day to day, or they even they seem to have the letter H for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden we're not sure if they have it anymore. So do they know most of the letters most of the time? Do they engage actively in shared reading? So do they have an interest in that activity? Do they have a means of communication and interaction? This is also an important question, and it's important that we clarify. This does not say that they can put sentences together. It doesn't say anything that they have a 200 words of vocabulary. It says they have a means of communication and interaction. That could be this and this. The last question is that they understand that reading and writing involves letters and words. Now, that question was actually modified to be, I think, a little more understandable, because this could give the impression that they need to know what those letters are and that there are things such as words. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that the student understands that print has meaning. They know that the word restroom over says that means something. And they know that the text in a book has some kind of meaning. They don't have to know what that is. The other thing that we can look at when it comes to that we need to look at with these is that when we're looking at emergent interventions, it includes things like shared reading, predictable chart writing, alphabet and phonological awareness, some independent reading and writing, and symbol-based communication. For the daily conventional interventions, that includes things like guided reading, word identification and decoding, writing, independent reading, and communication with symbols, as well as spelling. So you can see the difference between the two. What Erickson and Copenhaver suggest is that if you answer no to any one of the questions, that you go into the daily emergent interventions. If you go yes to all of them, you go into the daily conventional interventions. Now, I just want to say that on my part, obviously, you know your student. So you can always try the daily conventional interventions, but here's the caveat to it. If you notice that they're frustrated, stop and go back. We do not want to make literacy a chore. One of my colleagues has a daughter who is a voracious reader, and they did this thing in school where she had to keep a track of how many minutes a day she was reading. And she then wouldn't read on certain days. She's like, I've already hit my minutes. I'm not going to read this unless it counts toward my minutes. Those are the kinds of things that can take away the joy of reading from our students. So this is something that if frustration is being noticed, head to the daily emergent interventions. So when we're looking at literacy intervention, we want to use best practices. And those include both explicit instruction, which is historically how we've provided literacy instruction, kind of the whole drill and kill idea. What's this? What's this? But more recently, we've moved toward more of an embedded instruction. So the idea with this is that we want to provide embedded instruction and modify how we provide our explicit instruction. So let's talk about what that looks like. Explicit instruction tends to be very application oriented. Embedded instruction tends to be very application oriented. So it's about using language, using literate text in different activities. Like in this case, the kids are doing a scavenger hunt. It's about encouraging generalization of those skills into the world, into the life. And it's about enhancing motivation. These are great ways of teaching literacy, really important. And there are some students that are going to blossom with this. Many students and some skills actually need a more explicit instruction approach, just because they're just more challenging to learn. So how can we modify our explicit instruction to make it something that isn't going to become drill and kill, isn't going to become, dreadful for students? So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're using what we call repetition with variety. How many different ways can we teach the same skill? How many different types of activities? One day we might do a flashcard activity. The next day we might do a hunt around the room where they have to find all the letter T's or something like that. The other thing we want to look at is teaching, not testing. Too many times drill and kill becomes, what is this? What is this? What is this? All that leads to is a memorization. And it can become something that the students maybe don't really have that skill, but they've memorized it for that activity. So when we do an approach where we're actually teaching and then testing the skill later, it gives us a way of making sure that we're not caught in this trap of these students not really understanding or not really learning the skill, but rather memorizing it. So I've put together a few tips that I just think are really important for us to keep in mind. The first is that when we provide literacy instruction, along with that, we want to provide a robust AAC system. Now, I personally dislike the word robust because I don't think it can mean different things to different people. So I'm going to tell you what that means to me. That means that we give students access to a keyboard. We give them access to core and fringe vocabulary and to some pre-stored messages. That's what I'm looking for in a robust AAC system. Second, we don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that everything is literacy instruction. Not everything is literacy instruction. Some things are just building world knowledge or building cognitive or language skills, but literacy instruction focuses on the text. We don't want to complicate things. Some of the students that we work with have complex bodies. And so them being able to operate a communication system, they're still learning how to do that. And if we try to have them do that and teach literacy at the same time, we're trying to do two hard things at once. It's like, think about yourself carrying a big box. Carrying one big box is hard. Carrying two is impossible for a lot of us. So that's what we're asking students to do when we do two things or more together. So let's not complicate things. And the last thing we have listed is move on. Remember the questions that Copenhaver and Erickson asked. Do they know the letters most of the time? Do they understand that printed words have meaning? Those are the things that we're looking for. We're not looking for mastery because there's no such thing, even at the emergent level. We want to finally look for success. And that doesn't mean just skills. Too many times we have this checklist. They need to have this skill, this skill, this skill, and then we'll move on. But we want to, that's valuable when we move from emergent to conventional literacy instruction. However, when we just focus on the skills, we often lose the joy of the process, that it's not a race, that it's a process. So we want to think about, are we seeing in the student more independence? Are they going and getting books off the shelves themselves or opening them up on their device? Are they motivated, like they can't wait for reading time? Before they were just, they didn't have anything, want anything to do with it. Are they looking at more than one page in a book? Maybe before it was a child with autism that you were chasing around with a book and you were hoping they would look at it for 2 seconds. And now they're looking at it for 10. That's progress. Is it frequency? They want to read more often. And finally, is there joy? Is there interaction that's happening and everybody seems happy when they're reading? All of these are things that lead to greater skills in literacy. So now that we know what our goal is, which is children will read and write and use text to communicate with the rest of the world, and we know that we want to start early or start now and with best practices, let's look at how we can actually address emergent literacy for these individuals. What are some things that we can start using tomorrow, and how can we use the individual's communication system as part of that? So we're going to begin with emergent literacy, because that's sadly where a lot of our students are. If we look at people using AAC, we find that the majority are behind their peers in their literacy skills. So a lot of our students are at this level. So let's start here. So just repeating the definition of emergent literacy, which is that all reading and writing behaviors and understandings that proceed and develop into conventional reading and writing. We want to focus here on emergent reading, alphabet knowledge, phonological knowledge, and emergent writing. And I'm going to be showing you a few things for a few of these. When we look, we're going to begin with shared reading, and some of you may know this technique by Cole et al. The idea of commenting and asking for participation. It's called, and responding. It's called the CAR technique. So C stands for commenting, and then we wait. A is ask for participation, and then we wait. R is responding, and then we wait. A couple things about this that are important to be aware of is that commenting, this is not a testing situation. Shared reading should never be, do you see the? That's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for connection to the text. We're looking for them participating and realizing, there's something in this that I can learn and grow from. So I'm going to demonstrate for you what this looks like. And then I'm going to show you what it looks like when you're using AAC. I'm going to be reading from a book called HATS, which is part of the Core First Learning set of tools, which are available in a number of places at Tobii Dynavox, which I'm sure Shona and Sandra can tell you about later. But we're going to just use this particular book. It's called HATS. So I would start out by saying, oh, look, this book is about hats. I had a hat on today. Wait. Do you wear hats when it's cold? Oh, you do? Yeah, I wonder what kind of hats this little boy is going to have. So then we read the next page. Good morning, Dan. What do you want to be today? Looks like Dan's father is going to work. Pause. How about you? Does your dad go to work? And maybe he shakes his head or something. Yeah, I think your dad is maybe I fill it in. Move to the next. Today, I want to be a construction worker. Oh, it sounds like being a construction worker would be fun. Pause. Oh, I see you smiling. You'd like to be a construction worker too, huh? Pause. Maybe they do something else. Then we can continue. Good morning, Dan. What do you want to be today? Now, maybe at this point, we don't do another of the little car because that could become really redundant. I mean, how much can you say about the same repeated line over and over again? But then we go to this one. Today, I want to be a cowboy. A cowboy. I wonder what a cowboy does. And maybe we look at the child. Maybe they don't say anything. Maybe they look away. Oh, you're not interested in this. Or maybe they make a horse sound like a horse, or something like that, and then we can respond to that. So this is the CAR technique. Comment, wait, ask for participation, wait, respond, wait. So what does that look like when we're using AAC? Well, what we want to do when we're using this technique is we want to use the student's communication system. What we would suggest is that you focus on core vocabulary. And I know that most of you, if not all of you, know that core vocabulary are the words that make up about 80% of what we say. It's words like is, can, like, you, do, have, words like that. We also could use words that are, in a repeated set. So for example, words like, if we're reading a book like Brown Bear, what do you see? That has repeated animals in it. So maybe we're working on all those animal words, or maybe we're working on something like, what do you see? And we want them to use the word see over and over again. So that could be another option. But we want to use the individual's communication system at the same time. This gives us an opportunity to teach literacy and communication simultaneously, which, if you remember my rope, actually tightens that rope in 2 different strands. So we're getting twice the bang for our buck. So let's see what that looks like. So if I'm reading this, I could say, and if you can see my, my mouse on here, good morning, Dan. What do you want to be today? I could even do, what do you want to be today? And then I do car. Oh, it looks like he has all sorts of hats all over the floor. I wonder which one he's going to pick. Maybe the student points, oh, you think it's going to be that one? Aha, let's see. Today, I want to be a firefighter. Okay, a fire. Oh, you know what? We had a fire drill the other day. This is drawing connection to the text. Maybe the child has a negative look on their face. Oh, you didn't like the sound of it, did you? I know that was really upsetting. So then we move on. Good morning, Dan. And I do the same thing. What do you want to be today? Maybe I do a car, maybe I don't. Today, I want to be you. What do you want to be when you grow up? Or I could say, my comment first, when I grew up, I wanted to be a, what do you want to be when you grow up? Wait for that comment. So you can see that we're building in use of the student's communication system, encouraging that language while we're also reading the book and participating in this back and forth interaction. Now, if the student chooses to use their communication device, fantastic. But shared reading, we have to remember the purpose. Our purpose in shared reading for this is literacy. So we're really looking at that participation with the text. Now, the next thing I want to mention is that for many individuals, we get this pushback that when they're modeling, as soon as a word appears that they want to model that isn't in the system, they either give up completely. Well, all the words aren't there, so I just can't do any modeling anymore. Or they add every word to the system, which then makes the system with way too many words that the student probably isn't going to use again, or maybe they're in weird places. And so we want to make sure that we're modeling strategically. So we've talked about the idea that we can use core words or words that we're working on at the moment, animals or whatever it might be. That's great. We already know how to do that. If a word is missing, what we would suggest is use the keyboard. After all, what's our goal? For a student to read and write and use text to communicate. And for them to do that, they need access to the keyboard and to learn about letters. So this is a way that maybe we touch the first letter of the word that's missing, or maybe we even spell the whole thing out if the student has the capacity for that. Some students, they're not going to wait that long, so that's okay. The other thing we can do, sometimes when we read with students, we may read books that are above their level of language, linguistically. And if we do that, one thing that really can be used to bring it to their level and make it something they might even be able to read themselves is to rephrase what's in the book using the vocabulary they have available. So let me show you what this might look like. And you use a keyboard, obviously, that's appropriate for that student. So this is a book called The Gift, which is definitely above the level of a lot of students. And I'm going to be reading this, and I'm going to start by using core. So I'm going to read this first section. Too excited to sleep, with his large brown eyes open, Sebastian lay there daydreaming in the dark. He liked to think about lots of things when the lights were out. So we could say, oh, he likes to think. He likes it. Simple way of doing something where you're just using the core they had to say it again. Then we can continue reading. In his dreams, and this time I'm going to use my keyboard, in his dreams, there were no limitations. Sebastian could laugh, and sing. I'm pointing to the letters as I say that, and run and enjoy himself like other children. And of course, then as I finish this, I can go back and use car again. Oh, it sounds like Sebastian has some things that are hard for him when he's awake. Pause. Is there anything that's hard for you? Maybe it's something like that. And obviously you're going to shape your questions based on the student's level. But when we're doing this, keep in mind, remember you're modeling using the student's system. If the words aren't there, consider first letters or spelling. If the text is higher level than maybe, or the vocabulary that student has access to isn't really in the text, consider rephrasing using the vocabulary the student does have. Valuable skill. Erickson and Copenhaver in 2020 made a comment or about using symbols for communication and the difference between using symbols for communication and for literacy. What they said is that we think, and research supports the idea that symbols are wonderfully supportive in face-to-face communication. But if you want to teach children to read and write, then you must use traditional orthography. So if you look at SNAP, Core First and SNAP here, you can see that we've got the symbols with the words. Now you could remove some of those if you want, but they're supporting that student because they may not be able to spell or read the word have, but that symbol is one that they can find faster. So it may help them with efficiency. I'm going to show you now, this is text that's been symbolated. Take a look at that. Where did your eyes go when I hid those symbols? They moved from the symbol probably to the text. Your eyes went to the symbol first. So if I'm teaching literacy, we don't symbolate. We're going to use the symbols in the communication system, but we're not going to necessarily use them when we're teaching literacy, because we want the focus to be on the text. We know with our students, there are lots of different skill levels in terms of their physical abilities. So keep in mind that what I've been talking about can be done in all sorts of ways. Maybe they're talking or vocalizing. Great. They're using head nods or whatever. That's fine. Maybe they're pointing with their finger or using eye gaze. You could give them access to a communication system. You can give them access to a low-tech book. If maybe they're a student that's still learning how to use their body, maybe we even do something like partner assisted scanning, where we give them the vocabulary and we go through each row. And then when they get to the right row, they give us a yes, something like that. Or even we scan through the words. I can say, I'll do it with my mouse. Good morning, Dan. Which one of those is his name? I wonder. Tell me when you think I get there. And then they nod. Yes, that's his name. His name is Dan. Okay, maybe we could fill your name in there next time or something like that. We want to use appropriate materials. So a little story about me. I am a geek at heart. I was at Notre Dame with a friend of mine, and I had an opportunity for her to read out loud to me. She had the guidebook for Notre Dame, and she was reading it to me, and we were having a little shared reading experience because I would look over at the guidebook occasionally. It was great. I loved it. Appropriate materials for me. Not all of our students are 5 years old and under. We need to use materials that are appropriate for their interests and their age. There are lots of them out there. There are some that you can modify. Remember, we talked about the idea of paraphrasing or rephrasing using core. You could take magazines that they're interested in. There's lots of good books out there now that are much better for this, to be able to take care of this. You may be thinking, great, I know how to do this. I'm all set. I'm going to do all of it. I get it. When we first introduce this to people, it is overwhelming to them. When I say we're going to do shared reading, what happens is I often get this look because they just heard, oh gosh, this is some kind of technique. That sounds complex and I'm out. So what we want to do is start simply. Talk to them about, hey, read out loud to your child. Just read out loud. Pick one time a day, pick one book. And then add skills. Some people immediately pick up the idea of shared reading and this waiting and that kind of thing. They do it really well. Other people need to be trained and taught to do it. This is a really important thing, and we need to give them time to get used to each level before we push them to move on. We also want to make it fun. This is not a chore. Shared reading needs to be fun. Remember the joy. Tickle in the middle if it's appropriate for the child. Give them a chance to run around for a minute. Find something, if you're reading a book about a bear and you have a bear toy over there, say, go get the bear, go get him. And he runs over and gets it and then comes back. These are the things that make reading fun. Many of you may be in classroom settings, or you may have individuals that you're working with in groups, and you might have learners at different levels. If you do, you can do things like have each student participate in the same activity, but based on their skills. So you can do shared reading, and maybe one student responds by smiling, and another student makes a one-word comment, and someone else claps the rhythm of what you're reading because that's the level they're at. Maybe some read the frequent words for you because that's where they are. Maybe someone else points to the end of the period or the capital and makes a funny noise when they see that. This gives them a way to participate in the same activity at different levels. Independent reading is vital for the students that we work with. I love this picture of this baby climbing in and pulling out books. They probably just put them in their mouth, or maybe they flip through them really quickly, but they need to be within reach if the student is mobile, or they need to have access on their devices. So just really quickly, I'll show you a few options for making these available. When you have books that you already own, you can take pictures of them and put them in different tools. And to maintain copyright, you do need to own that book. So in BoardMaker's book template, if you have access to BoardMaker, you can put it in and then it will read the book and the student can flip through and have the book read to them. You can do something in TD Snap's photo albums. I'll actually show you what this looks like live. So if I go into my into my topics and then into my reading topic, this is where I put it. You can see on the bottom, or no, you can't see because for some reason it didn't share. It did share?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You can see this hats book right here. So here I have the hats book, the picture from it, and then down below I have the words.
Hats.
And in theory, that should be speaking, and it would, except that probably my speaker isn't working. So therefore, just assume that it's working. And then I can hit the next button, and there's the next information, the next page. And then we can have that for the whole book. The student can access a book independently. This is huge for our students. Finally, something like Tar Heel Reader or on a Kindle. Tar Heel Reader is a tool that is free. It's available through the University of North Carolina. The interface for this, which is what you're seeing here, actually comes in a number of languages. Comes in a number of languages. You can put books in even more languages. So this is a place where you can not only find books that other people may have written, but also write books yourself. And you can create a favorites page for your student, which they can access using whatever tools they're able to use. Oh, great. Thanks. Perfect. Okay. So now we've talked about shared reading. One of the things that we often forget for emergent communicators and emergent literacy learners is that writing starts very early. How many of you have had a child take a piece of paper, put one big red stripe across the front and say, look, I wrote my name, or look, I drew a picture of a tree. And you think, well, that's wonderful. Well, our students need access to those as well. And so we need to make sure they have access to something called an alternative pencil if they're not able to hold a pen or pencil themselves. This comes in the forms of a traditional keyboard, like a computer keyboard, could be an on-screen keyboard. It could be a letter board like the one that you see here that's accessible using eye tracking. It could be something like a whiteboard or what we call draw mode in TD Control. And I actually show that in a minute. But the whiteboard I will show you in TD Snap. So if I go into my dashboard and I pick my whiteboard, there it is. I can go in here and using my finger, I can draw or I can write and I can switch colors and things like that, or I can add images and then I can create my own little short books and things like that. So that's the whiteboard. And their TD Control is a way of using your computer through your eyes. And there is a draw mode in it that allows you to be able to actually draw and have our students have the experience of making letters themselves, which is huge. Predictable chart writing is a way to get started with writing for students who are at the emergent level. And this is something where we're going to just look through each step. You begin by writing the chart, and then you reread and work with the chart. You cut up the words in a sentence strip and have the students rearrange them. Then you have them be the sentence themselves, and then you make a book using this chart writing, the chart that you created. You want to start with topics of interest, not necessarily academic topics, and you want to spread the activities with this over the day. So let's say that I begin with writing the chart. So my chart is what we think about Barcelona. So I think Barcelona is blank. So each student comes up with what they think. Now, if I'm a student who struggles a little bit, doesn't know my communication system as well, I might get them to the descriptions page. And then they can pick whatever they want. There's no wrong answer. So maybe each student, I say it's beautiful. Someone else says it's fun, it's color. Maybe this student says it's home. Maybe they're able to navigate through their system on their own. This person says it's big. Great. We've got our chart. We reread it together. We think about it. We pick maybe different words out. We do all sorts of cool things with this. The next thing we do is that we take the sentence and we cut the words apart. Now, for a lot of students, what they could do is rearrange it themselves. They can drag the I over to the beginning and they can drag it, think, and afterwards. Well, for some of our students, they're not able to do that. But that's where something like TD Control can come in handy. So I'm just going to go into a different PowerPoint and put my eye tracker back on. And I'm going to open this up. Now, what I can do in TD Control is I can look in our continuous mode. I can select, I can get into continuous mode, first of all. And I can select what I want to do. Now, I would set all this up for the student, but if they're a good eye tracker, they can use this and they could potentially drag these around themselves. Now, remember I mentioned, sorry, there we go. Remember I mentioned that our students, that many times what happens is our students have operational issues. They're still learning eye tracking. That's something that we don't want to work on this if the student doesn't have these eye gaze skills to do it. I would not work on that together. So instead, what we could do is we could use the students' language skills and work on language and literacy at the same time. So what we're going to do is I can go into my TD Snap and I can go back and maybe I can go to my descriptions or my word lists, and they could use things like directional words to tell me it's up, down, right, and left. You know, move it there, move it all, or if they have that, if that's something we're working on. Or they could even just answer yes and no. Is it where you want it to be? Yes. So this is how we could do that for our students. Within, and this is just some examples of what that might look like. The next thing that happens is if we want the student to be the sentence. So in this case, again, you put the word around their body, and then they stand up and become the sentence themselves, which doesn't sound like much fun maybe to us, but kids find this just completely enjoyable. And again, they can use their devices to say, oh, I need to be by Joan, or I need to be, are you in the right place? Yes. So this gives students, even with limited communication, the ability to participate. And finally, we make a book. And all those items that I showed you before, Board Maker, TD Snaps, phone, photo albums, and a Tar Heel Reader are all great ways of doing this. If you have learners at different levels, they can be the first reader. They can write a longer sentence, perhaps. Maybe they write independently. So these are all ways that you can work on, use the same activity to work at different levels. The next thing we want to talk about is alphabet knowledge and phonological awareness. These are things like rhyming and alliteration and pointing out letters and rhyming in words in the environment as well. So it's the idea that this letter means this sound. So I'm going to share with you this is more an explicit approach to teaching alphabet instruction. The idea is that you do one letter a day, takes about 10 minutes. They suggest that you cycle through using different patterns. Most of us do a one letter a week thing. It takes a long time to get through the whole alphabet. Whereas if you do one letter in a day, then you're cycling through the letters much more quickly, and you use different orders. Now, one of the things we know from research is that students actually are more interested in letters that are important to them. So the B is going to be important to me because it's the first letter of my name. So the first cycle is with the letters that are most frequent in all the students in the classroom and all of their names. And then there are different ones. So each day emphasizes letter names, upper and lower case, sound the letter represents, finding it in text, and writing or selecting it from a keyboard. So this is how that works. So we begin by showing the letters, and we say, this is the letter M. M. This is the lowercase m. This is the uppercase M. M, M. This letter is the letter M. Let's practice naming this letter. What is this letter? Say it in your head. M. What's this one over here? M. It's the uppercase M. What's this one? M. It's the lowercase m. Yes. So then we can say this letter represents the sound mm. What does this one represent? Mm. What does this one represent? M. This letter represents and now we do stories and things that add to that information. Then notice the student hasn't yet used their device. The next thing we do is we practice the sound it represents. They say it to themselves, and then finally, this is where they're actually using their system. So I say, what is this one? They point to the letter M on their device. So they're learning how to produce that. If they're able to write, they might write the letter M at this point. The last thing that you do is you go through and you have them point out the letter M in text. So they're going to point to the M. I'm going to put my hand across here. I'm going to point to each one. You tell me when I get to a letter M, and then they can say, yes, that's the letter M, or they can produce it on their device. Again, learners of different levels. Students who are further along, maybe they think of other words that start with the letter M. Maybe they're the ones that are naming M, M, M. we write the letter maybe every time I say it and my student is thinking it, who's at the emergent level, this other student is actually writing it out themselves, or maybe they're finding it in the books independently. Many times we work with students who aren't interested in literacy. A few hints: we want to use their interests. I think a lot of us try to do that. Work within their attention span. It could be that those 2 seconds that you spend on a book page may increase to 3 and then 4. We just want to see where they can go. So let's try to work within that. We don't want them to get frustrated. We want to count every success and remember back to those types of successes we talked about. And we want to keep that end goal in mind, that we want them to read and write and use text to communicate with the rest of the world. And we want to focus on the joy. Let's give them a chance to develop those skills. We hope that our students will move beyond emergent literacy. And remember that when we move into conventional literacy approaches, this is when we want to answer yes to all those questions that Erickson and Copenhaver and Erickson have put together. There are a number of ways of looking at literacy. In English, Swedish, and Norwegian, we have a program called Accessible Literacy Learning that can be used. That's something that teaches phonological approaches as well as some sight words and that sort of thing. But that's something that many of you do naturally. You're already working on these skills in the school setting. So let me just share a few things about incorporating the individual's communication system into conventional literacy. Conventional literacy refers to reading silently and writing that follows the form, content, and use of standard conventions. So this is reading comprehension, self-directed reading, word study, and writing. Every student needs a means of participation. They need an accessible keyboard, whether it's low tech, like the one you see here, or high tech. They need access to core vocabulary, as well as the fringe words, and they need access to accessible books, like what we've talked about before. This is a key to be able to give them a way of interacting during these conventional literacy interactions or teaching moments. The other thing we want to think about is how we can take advantage of tools that allow for literacy opportunities for our high-tech AAC users. Some of the smart home devices are wonderful for this, or they can even browse the internet using a regular browser or a gaze-enabled browser like TD Browse. But the idea here is that take advantage of these things to give students a chance to use their literacy skills for functional and highly motivating things. So today we've identified our goal, which is that students read and write using text to communicate with the rest of the world. We've talked about starting earlier now with the best practices, some things that you can do tomorrow for addressing emergent literacy, the CAR technique with modeling, including using first letters if the words aren't there, or spelling, as well as rephrasing using core when a text is at a little higher level. We've talked about predictive chart writing for that first step into writing, as well as teaching alphabet using this very elicited kind of instruction technique. We talked about when to progress and a little bit about how you can use AAC in conventional literacy. So our goal today is to take these powerful letters and make them available to all the students that we work with, to give them the ability to say whatever it is that they want to say. Just a reminder that there is no one that is too anything to make progress in learning to read and write. It doesn't mean we're all going to be masters of reading and writing, but any progress can move us closer to a goal of independence. And keep in mind that learning to read is a joy, not a race. Let's give our students time to learn. Let's present them with opportunities to participate in literacy activities, and let's move them as far ahead as we possibly can. We did then what we knew how to do. Now that we know better, we do better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bethany, as always. Another great piece to get everyone thinking, hopefully, and getting ideas on how we can start introducing those lovely letters.